Hi, my name is Faith Lowe, and this is my theory-based case presentation. So I did the case study on a visit to Dwight's Hollow. Our client here is JD Chapman. He's 15, high schooler, living in the rural parts of West Virginia. His presenting issues and reason for initial referral were for truancy. He is a high risk for dropout and has an extensive family history of not finishing high school. His grades dropped upon entering high school, but up until that point, he was a pretty good student through middle school. He currently struggles with reading, specifically doesn't like reading out loud in class, has not been tested for learning disability, has financial struggles in the family, including living off disability income, welfare, issues of bankruptcy, living in a multifamily home environment, which just adds in some dynamics to consider, and a general family belief system that supports no need for high school diploma. And we'll get into that a little more in the next slides. So my understanding of the case as the practitioner is that there's a lot of environmental systems that need to be considered here, including the micro, meso, and macro levels. On the micro level, there is an instilled belief in JD that a high school diploma is not needed and that he can just go right into the work field. He does have struggles with reading, which could be one of the big barriers in his desire to continue schooling. On the meso level, we've got family dynamics and a extensive history of dropping out, including his own parents and his siblings. There are financial challenges that could be a barrier to his continued education. And on the macro level, West Virginia in general is a low income / poverty state. The attitudes around education is that it's considered a social threat because it creates the opportunity for family members to leave out of state. Individual and family dynamics and barriers. So the individual client, so for JD, he is the youngest child. Was a good student until middle school. He is a high risk for dropout due to the family dynamics and beliefs around education, especially into those high school years. The family dynamics as a whole is that they're lifelong residents, which is common among residents of West Virginia. They live in a multifamily home with several adults living under one roof. They are experiencing bankruptcy due to a lot of debt that they've acquired, and they're living off disability income in combination with mom's side income. As far as the family goes, the family dynamics include, we've got dad, mom, brother, sister, and just some mention of grandfather that I found interesting. Harlan, who is the dad, he quit school at age 16, became a coal miner, which actually does have good pay, but had to stop due to a bad back. It's also a very dangerous field to go into. But due to his back being injured, he's now living off disability income. Mom was also a high school dropout and has never worked outside the home. Her means of creating income include basket making and babysitting. Jack, his older brother, initially left the state to find work. He was married at age 17, worked construction, but then recently returned back home to help care for his mother-in-law. There are some stressors there. And then for his older sister, Lori, she lives at home with her parents and her 3-year-old daughter. She did go back and get her GED and does have further education plans, which could be a strength to the family. And then there was mention that his grandfather was a career politician, but his level of education is unknown. The mid-level theory, one that I chose was the ecological and systems theory, simply because it goes into how interrelated all of our systems are, including the microsystem, mesosystem, exosystem, and macrosystem, aka person and environment perspective. And my rationale for this was that due to the social constructs and norms in West Virginia, it would be good to consider the full environment of JD including his location in West Virginia, which again is very rural and hard to get to, his family life, so socioeconomic status, the dynamics of the multifamily home and such, and then his personal beliefs and attitudes about education, so that I could create a intervention strategy from that person and environment perspective. I also like that this is a holistic approach to intervention, and then implementation would revolve around further education focused on the micro, meso, and macro level of the family to introduce the benefits of further education for JD and hopefully reduce the barriers in those systems. Strengths and limitations of ecological systems theory include, so for the strength, again, there's that holistic approach. It understands the complexity of individual challenges outside of the individual and pushes social workers to seek social change. So it could be a means for social workers to get on board with education in these communities to support, why it would be good for families to help eliminate barriers in receiving their, in their child receiving their high school diploma. Limitations include the complexities that make this theory difficult to measure. It is hard to implement as an evidence-based practice. It is so broad, abstract, and metaphorical that it's difficult to nail down which interventions would be most beneficial. The second mid-level theory that I chose was narrative theory. The definition of this is that it helps social workers understand and intervene with clients based on their own stories. It is multi-storied, so we could include the family's narratives as well. You get a sense of the individual's meaning of life through their perspective, and you get a good idea of how social construction and how societies develop ideas that can become internalized by those groups and individuals. My rationale for this was to honor the experiences of all family members involved as a means of self-empowerment, specifically connecting the family around shared purposes and advocating for social justice, again, in West Virginia's education approaches. And then implementation of this would be by taking JD's story and pulling out his strengths while considering his full experience through his own lens, which means he can externalize the problem and look at it from the outsider's perspective. He can, reinterpret, retell his story, and then questions I may ask may help him recognize how the externalized problem affects him. The strengths and limitation of narrative theory. Strengths include it does focus on empowerment and remains on the focus of the personal agency of the client. It's comfortable for them to simply be able to tell their story. It's not concerned with just the problems, but also interested in the interaction between the person's meso and macro levels. It recognizes how social construction can lead to societal messages, can offer practical applications for social workers concerned with issues of social justice, and then can serve as a call for action for social workers, again, gearing towards education in West Virginia and the importance of it. Limitations include that there's only smaller qualitative studies that have been done so far. So there's not a lot of evidence-based research out there. It's not highly valued by leaders within evidence-based practice, and then doesn't usually fit well with managed care and settings that require more thorough assessment or diagnosis. Additional considerations for JD, I just threw some things to consider, and then just also wanted to add the noted strengths of JD that could be worked into that systems or actually both theories. But what to consider what education he may need to follow in his grandfather's steps, since that was unknown. I do think that would be good to explore, since he did mention possibly getting into some sort of political role. Possibly consider testing for learning disability or tutoring for reading to remove that barrier. That does seem to be a big challenge for him and his desire to continue his education. Consider his feelings of overwhelm and fear of not being capable. So looking at, that empowerment perspective through narratives. Consider feelings of discomfort taking his concerns to his teachers. His strengths that were noted is that he has great analytical abilities, interpersonal skills, humor, positive belief that he will be successful whether he finishes high school or not. And these are my resources, and thank you for listening.